The structure that we call the Tower of Babel did not appear in isolation. In the land of Shinar, where this great project began, the cultures of Mesopotamia had already developed monumental architecture in the form of ziggurats. These massive step-like temples were not simply places of worship. They were believed to be physical bridges between earth and heaven. Each level rose higher than the last, narrowing as it ascended, symbolizing the climb toward the divine. Priests would ascend these structures to perform rituals on the summit, which was thought to be the place where the gods descended. The design itself was more than architectural convenience. It was a deliberate expression of cosmic order, mapping the heavens onto the earth. The people of Babel were not inventing something entirely new. They were drawing from an ancient blueprint that already existed in the sacred traditions of their region. Their desire to build a tower with its top in the heavens echoes the purpose of ziggurats, but it also suggests an even greater ambition. Instead of simply creating a place for a god to descend, they wanted to build a structure that would ascend into the realm of the divine itself. In their eyes, this was not only a temple, it was a direct passage, a stairway to reach the throne of heaven. Ancient cultures believed that geometry and architecture could mirror the cosmos. The square base of a ziggurat, the careful alignment with cardinal directions, and the ascent through levels all carried symbolic meaning. Every stone placed in those patterns was a reflection of the larger order of the universe. When Genesis describes the tower and the city that surrounded it, the text does not dismiss it as meaningless human labor. Instead, it presents the work as something significant enough to draw the attention of God Himself. This suggests that the builders were not merely stacking bricks, they were aligning their creation with forces and patterns that they believed would open a gate to the heavens. If we look closely, we see that the phrase, "its top in the heavens," can also be read as more than just height. In the ancient mind, the heavens were not merely the sky, but the realm of divine power and spiritual authority. A tower that reached into heaven symbolized a structure that pierced the boundary between the physical and the spiritual. This interpretation begins to blur the line between architecture and technology. What if the tower was designed not only as a monument, but as an instrument, something that could channel energies and open portals? The ancients often built their temples in alignment with stars, solstices, and celestial movements. Archaeologists have discovered that ziggurats and pyramids across the world were not random constructions, but careful reflections of the sky above. The builders of Babel may have followed the same principle, crafting their tower as a mirror of the heavens, intending to make it resonate with the cosmic order. This resonance, they may have believed, would allow them to pierce the veil and connect with the divine directly. The ambition of this project lay in its scale, but also in its purpose. By uniting in language, in plan, and in spirit, the people of Shinar aimed to force their way into realms that had been closed to them. They were not satisfied with receiving revelation or waiting for divine presence to descend. Instead, they sought to climb upward, to construct their own path, to bypass the barriers that God had placed between heaven and earth. What makes the Babel account so powerful is that it highlights this conflict between human ingenuity and divine boundaries. The blueprint they followed was ancient, rooted in Mesopotamian traditions, but their ambition was greater than anything that had come before. The tower was not only a reflection of cosmic order, it was humanity's attempt to manipulate that order for its own ends. In this light, Babel was not simply a building, it was a challenge. A declaration that mankind believed it could engineer its way into the sacred. This understanding changes how we see the story. Babel was not just a cultural curiosity or a failed architectural project. It was an expression of humanity's deepest desire to ascend, to break free from limitation, and to step into the realm of the divine on its own terms. The blueprint of Babel was drawn from the ancient patterns of temples and ziggurats, but its purpose was something much more radical, something that pushed against the very boundaries of creation. The account of Babel is inseparable from the story of language. At the beginning, humanity was united with one tongue, one speech, and this unity allowed them to accomplish their monumental task. The divine intervention that followed did not simply halt construction, it shattered their unity by confounding their speech. What happened at Babel was more than the introduction of new words. It was the disruption of a vibrational harmony that had given humanity a unique power. Language is more than communication. Words carry sound, and sound carries frequency. In many traditions, creation itself begins with sound. In Genesis chapter 1, God speaks, and the universe comes into being. The Word of God is not merely information, it is a force that brings forth light, life, and order. Psalm 33 verse 9 declares, "For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm." If creation itself was spoken into existence, then language holds within it the power to shape reality. Ancient peoples understood this truth instinctively. Chants, prayers, and hymns were not only expressions of devotion, they were believed to align the human soul with the rhythms of the cosmos. Sacred sounds were used to heal, to open spiritual insight, and to connect with higher realms. In this context, the single language of humanity before Babel was more than convenience. It was a unified vibration, a collective harmony that allowed them to resonate together as one voice. When the people said, "Let us make a name for ourselves," their words carried power. The act of naming was considered sacred. To name something was to define it, to establish its essence. By seeking to make a name through their tower, they were not simply aiming for fame. They were attempting to harness the creative force of language to alter their place in the universe. Their speech, united in intention, became a tool of immense strength. The confusion of tongues at Babel was a disruption of that energy. Suddenly, instead of one unified sound, there was a cacophony of frequencies, each clashing against the other. The harmony was broken, and with it, the capacity to resonate as one. This was not merely a matter of misunderstanding. It was the collapse of an energetic structure that had been holding their endeavor together. Without the unified vibration, the tower lost its power and the project crumbled. Modern science has begun to glimpse the connection between sound and matter. Experiments with cymatics show how sound frequencies can create geometric patterns in physical substances. The ancients may not have had our modern terminology, but they understood the principle. They knew that sound shapes reality, and they used that knowledge in their chants, prayers, and rituals. At Babel, that principle was magnified to a global scale, as an entire people shared one sound, one frequency, one creative force. The loss of that unity was devastating. Left unchecked, their united language could have given rise to forces beyond their control. The single tongue they shared may have been the key that allowed them to attempt the Stargate project in the first place. When that key was broken, the gate could no longer be opened. In this sense, the scattering of languages was both a judgment and a mercy. The Tower of Babel reminds us that words are not small things. They carry weight, energy, and creative potential. What happened at Shinar was not just a story of construction halted. It was a lesson in the spiritual power of language. Sound is a bridge between the physical and the spiritual, and at Babel, that bridge was severed to protect humanity from a path that could have led to destruction. The account of Babel also invites us to ask a question about the unseen. Who was watching this great project unfold? The text tells us that God came down to see the city and the tower. But throughout biblical tradition, we also find references to heavenly beings who observe, who intervene, and who interact with humanity. The story of Babel cannot be separated from the wider world of the spiritual realm, where angels, watchers, and even rebellious beings are deeply interested in the fate of mankind. In the book of Enoch, a text well known in the ancient Jewish world, the Watchers are described as angels who descended to earth, teaching forbidden knowledge to humanity. They revealed secrets of the heavens, of weapons, of enchantments, and of hidden sciences. Their interference led to corruption and destruction, provoking divine judgment in the days of Noah. Although the book of Enoch is not part of the canonical scriptures for most traditions, Its ideas influenced how people understood the dangers of forbidden knowledge. Against this backdrop, the Tower of Babel takes on a new dimension. Could it be that humanity's ambition was stirred by knowledge that came from outside, by whispers of the watchers who once sought to lift man beyond his place? The gods of Mesopotamia, worshipped in the same land where Babel rose, were often portrayed as dwelling in the heavens and descending upon their temples. Ziggurats were believed to be their chosen resting places. If the Tower of Babel was built in that spirit, then its construction was not only a challenge to God, but also a declaration of allegiance to those false powers. The builders may have thought that they were building a gateway not just to the God of heaven, but to a pantheon of beings who promised wisdom, power, and glory. In the scriptures, we often see angels described as watchers of human affairs. In Daniel chapter 4 verse 17, the decree concerning Nebuchadnezzar comes from the watchers, the holy ones. These beings are presented as agents of God's will, overseeing the rise and fall of kingdoms. Yet the very use of the word watcher suggests that the heavens are full of eyes observing what unfolds on earth. At Babel, the project of mankind was not hidden. It was seen from above, and the response came swiftly. Why would the watchers, whether faithful or fallen, care about Babel? Because the tower represented humanity's attempt to ascend without divine permission. The faithful watchers would see this as rebellion, a dangerous attempt that threatened the balance established by God. The fallen ones, however, might see it as an opportunity, a way to lure humanity into dependence on forbidden paths. This tension between heavenly oversight and spiritual rebellion casts Babel as a cosmic battleground, where human ambition collided with divine order. The narrative of Genesis does not detail every spiritual presence at Babel, but the broader biblical and cultural context suggests that mankind was not alone in its project. The heavens were watching, some in opposition, some perhaps in encouragement, but all recognizing the significance of what humanity was attempting. A tower that pierced the sky was more than a building. It was a signal, a beacon declaring humanity's intent to breach the boundaries of creation. This sheds light on why God's intervention was so decisive. The tower was not merely a monument of pride, it was a doorway in the making. If completed, it could have opened channels to spiritual realms that humanity was not prepared to face. The watchers above knew what was at stake. God himself knew that nothing would be impossible for them if they continued, and so he acted to stop it. The Tower of Babel, in this light, is not just a tale of human defiance, but a reminder that we are always seen from above. Our actions are not hidden. The spiritual realm observes, responds, and sometimes intervenes. At Babel, humanity attempted to build a stairway to heaven, but the eyes of heaven were already fixed upon them, ready to respond. When modern readers think of ancient construction, the image is often of crude tools, heavy stones, and countless laborers. Yet the monuments that still stand from those times challenge this view. The precision of pyramids, the alignments of temples, and the mysteries of megalithic sites all suggest that ancient civilizations possessed knowledge that went beyond simple brute force. The Tower of Babel, standing at the center of Mesopotamian culture, was almost certainly built upon such advanced understanding. Sacred geometry was one of the keys to this knowledge. Patterns such as the circle, the square, and the triangle were not just mathematical curiosities. They were seen as reflections of cosmic order. When applied to construction, these patterns created structures that resonated with the natural world and with the heavens. The builders of Babel, drawing from the traditions of their land, would have known these principles. Their tower may have been designed not only for height, but for harmony with forces invisible to the eye. Astronomical alignment was another ancient science. Across cultures, monuments were carefully placed to align with solstices, equinoxes, and the rising of key stars. The builders of Babel were no different. The land of Shinar lay under the same sky that guided farmers, priests, and kings. They read the heavens, and they built in response. It is possible that the tower itself was oriented as a kind of celestial instrument, a structure that marked the stars and sought to use them as keys to open hidden doors. Energy systems may also have played a role. In many ancient traditions, the earth itself was believed to carry currents of power, lines of force that could be tapped through proper placement of stone and structure. Temples, pyramids, and altars were often built upon these lines, amplifying their effect. If the people of Babel possessed even a fraction of this knowledge, their tower could have been more than a monument. It could have been an energy device, channeling the very forces of creation. The unity of the people added to this effect. With one purpose, one plan, and one language, they were able to synchronize their efforts, both physically and spiritually. Every stone placed upon the tower carried not only weight, but intention. The collective focus of humanity may have been the most powerful ingredient of all, turning their construction into a vessel of concentrated energy. This unity, God Himself acknowledged, made nothing impossible for them. When viewed in this way, the Tower of Babel becomes a convergence of science, spirituality, and ambition. It was a project that blended geometry, astronomy, and human will into a single effort. The ancients were not ignorant. They were working with principles that still puzzle modern minds. What they sought to build was not a simple skyscraper, but a gateway that stood at the crossroads of heaven and earth. The danger lay in their misuse of this knowledge. Sacred geometry, astronomy, and energy were not forbidden in themselves, but the attempt to use them to storm the gates of heaven crossed a line. Knowledge without wisdom becomes perilous, and at Babel, humanity's reach exceeded what it was prepared to handle. The technology of the ancients was real, powerful, and often mysterious. At Babel, that technology was combined with pride and rebellion, creating a project that demanded divine intervention. The story reminds us that knowledge is a gift, but it is also a responsibility. The ancients knew how to build in harmony with the heavens, but at Babel, they sought to turn that harmony into a weapon, a key to force open the gate of the divine. The Tower of Babel has often been imagined as an architectural marvel, but when the language of the Bible is studied alongside other ancient accounts, it begins to resemble something more than a mere structure. The idea of a ladder between heaven and earth appears elsewhere in Scripture, most notably in the vision of Jacob. In Genesis chapter 28, Jacob sees a ladder set upon the earth, its top reaching to heaven, with angels ascending and descending upon it. That vision was not of a physical ladder made of wood or stone, but of a spiritual gateway that opened before his eyes. This raises the question, was Babel humanity's attempt to build its own version of such a ladder, an artificial portal that would bypass divine permission? Jacob's ladder represents an authentic connection initiated by God Himself, where the heavens open to reveal a direct communication between the earthly and the divine. The Tower of Babel, however, appears to be a counterfeit, a human attempt to engineer what God had revealed only in vision. The contrast is striking. Jacob rests his head on a stone and receives a divine vision unearned, while the builders of Babel labor endlessly to craft their own ladder without God's blessing. The essence of the story lies not only in height, but in access. Who opens the gate, and on whose authority is the passage granted? The vision of Ezekiel also deepens the mystery of portals. In Ezekiel chapter 1, the prophet describes the heavens opening, and he sees wheels within wheels full of eyes, moving in unison. These are not ordinary images. They describe a kind of heavenly chariot, a vehicle of glory that carries him into visions of God. Ezekiel did not build this structure, nor did he command it into being. It came as a revelation, a divine unveiling that swept him into realms far beyond human control. Once again, the pattern emerges. When God opens a gate, it is holy, awe-inspiring, and purposeful. When mankind attempts to open one by force, it becomes rebellion. Even the story of Elijah carries echoes of this theme. Taken up in a whirlwind by a chariot of fire, he ascends not by ladder or tower, but by the will of God. The transition from earth to heaven is accomplished without any human engineering. These biblical images of ascent highlight, that true passage to the heavenly realms is always initiated by the Creator, never constructed by man. In this light, Babel's tower resembles an unauthorized duplication of what God reveals only at His choosing. The desire to ascend, however, is universal. Across cultures, myths speak of stairways, ladders, and bridges connecting the human and the divine. Whether it is the Norse Bifrost, the rainbow bridge between worlds, or the Mesopotamian stair-step temples, humanity has long imagined pathways that link the earthly to the heavenly. Babel stands as the biblical expression of that universal longing, but it also reveals the danger of attempting to seize what only God can grant. Seen through this lens, the Tower of Babel becomes less about human pride in building and more about humanity's craving for access. The tower may have been envisioned as a cosmic ladder, a physical stargate, an engineered portal that would force heaven to open. By aligning architecture, language, and intention, the builders sought to unlock what had been closed. In their eyes, it was not rebellion, it was progress. In God's eyes, it was trespass. What makes the story profound is that it draws a line between revelation and intrusion. Jacob received a ladder because God chose to show him one. Ezekiel saw wheels within wheels because God revealed them. Elijah ascended in a chariot because God sent for him. The builders of Babel, by contrast, decided that they could construct their own path without waiting for divine invitation. The issue was not simply architecture or ambition. It was the presumption of access without relationship. The Tower of Babel, when compared with Jacob's ladder and Ezekiel's vision, emerges as humanity's counterfeit gateway, a false cosmic ladder built on pride. It was not only an attempt to reach heaven, it was an attempt to bypass God Himself. That is why it had to be stopped, not because humanity built too high, but because they sought to force open what could only be opened by grace. When God descended to see the city and the tower, His response was swift and decisive. He confused their language, scattered the people, and brought the project to an abrupt halt. At first glance, this may seem like punishment for arrogance, yet when the words of the account are studied closely, a deeper reason becomes visible. God did not merely punish, He protected. The scattering of humanity was not only judgment, it was mercy. The divine words recorded in Genesis 11 are striking. Nothing that they propose to do will be impossible for them. This does not sound like a dismissal of a foolish human project. It is an acknowledgement of power, of potential, of the real possibility that mankind, united in one language and purpose, could unlock forces far beyond what they were ready to wield. The tower represented more than arrogance, it represented danger, a doorway that could lead to destruction. God's decision to intervene was not out of fear that humans could rival Him. The Creator cannot be rivaled. It was out of concern that humanity would open doors that they could not close. Like children playing with fire, they had grasped knowledge and power that could consume them. Shutting down the tower was an act of love, a necessary step to protect mankind from stepping into realms that would destroy their souls. The language barrier was the method chosen. By dividing speech, God divided thought, intention, and vibration. The unity that gave the tower its strength was undone, and with it, the project collapsed. This scattering of language created nations, cultures, and divisions, but it also slowed the pace of human ambition, forcing growth to occur within boundaries rather than in reckless leaps. In this way, the confusion of tongues became both a curse and a blessing. It is important to note that God had always intended to bring humanity into His presence, but in His way and His time. The true gate of heaven would one day be revealed through His Son, not through human towers of brick. Babel was premature, an attempt to seize what had not yet been given. By closing that path, God preserved the greater plan, a plan that would one day open heaven through the true and living gate. Seen this way, Babel is not merely a story of human pride and divine punishment. It is a story of divine mercy, of God shutting a dangerous door so that humanity could survive long enough to receive the true door when it arrived. What looked like scattering was preservation. What looked like frustration was protection. This truth echoes through the scriptures, where God often blocks human paths for their own good. In Numbers chapter 22, the angel of the Lord stands in the road to stop Balaam, saving him from destruction. In Acts chapter 16, Paul is prevented by the Spirit from entering certain regions, redirected instead toward God's plan. Babel belongs to this same pattern. God intervenes not to withhold blessing, but to preserve his people for a greater blessing still to come. The shutting of the gate at Babel teaches that not every door is meant to be opened by human hands. Some gates are guarded for our protection. The builders of Babel reached for something beyond their grasp, and in love, God scattered them. That scattering was the beginning of nations, the shaping of history, and the preparation for a time when heaven's gate would be opened in the right way. Although the tower itself was abandoned, the spirit behind it did not vanish. In time, it re-emerged in Babylon, the great city that rose in the very same land. Babylon became more than a political power. It became a symbol throughout the Bible of rebellion, pride, and the pursuit of forbidden glory. The story of Babel found its echo in the empire that would dominate the ancient world and become a prophetic image of human arrogance across the ages. Babylon inherited the ambition of Babel. Its ziggurats reached high, its temples honored false gods, and its kings proclaimed their own glory. Nebuchadnezzar, the greatest of Babylon's rulers, walked upon his palace roof and declared, "Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" His words reflect the same spirit that once said, "Let us make a name for ourselves." The seed planted at Babel blossomed in Babylon's pride. The prophets often used Babylon as the very picture of human rebellion against God. Isaiah chapter 14 portrays the king of Babylon with words that echo beyond him, describing a figure who says, "I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of assembly." Whether speaking of a man or of the spirit behind him, the ambition is the same as Babel: to climb where one does not belong, to seize heaven by force. Babylon also became a center of mystical knowledge. The Chaldeans, known for their wisdom, astronomy, and divination, were heirs to the sciences of ancient Mesopotamia. What was begun in Babel as an attempt to harness cosmic order became, in Babylon, an organized system of magic and occult practice. This city was more than a political empire. It was a spiritual hub, a continuation of Babel's attempt to connect with realms forbidden. The book of Daniel gives us vivid images of this. Daniel is taken into Babylon, educated in its wisdom, and yet he stands apart, refusing to defile himself with its practices. In his story, Babylon represents the clash between the wisdom of God and the counterfeit wisdom of men. The fiery furnace, the lion's den, the visions of kings all underscore that Babylon's power was real, but it was not ultimate. The legacy of Babel had grown strong, but it could not overcome the sovereignty of God. In the New Testament, Babylon takes on an even greater symbolic role. In Revelation, the great harlot Babylon sits upon many waters, intoxicates the nations, and becomes the mother of abominations. This is not merely the ancient empire, it is the spirit of Babel carried forward through history, representing every human system that exalts itself against God. The tower that once stood in Shinar became a city that stood against the people of God, and finally a symbol of rebellion for all ages. The connection between Babel and Babylon shows that the spirit of pride, rebellion, and forbidden ambition is not confined to a single moment. It repeats through history, reshaping itself in different forms, but carrying the same essence. The scattering at Babel slowed humanity, but the seed remained, growing again in the empire of Babylon. The legacy of Babel is clear. When mankind seeks to ascend without God, it creates systems that oppose him. The tower became a city, the city became an empire, and the empire became a symbol for every age. The story of Babel did not end with scattered nations. It continued in Babylon, reminding us that the desire to climb without God's permission always leads to downfall. Across the ancient world, the heavens were seen as a map, a guide that revealed divine order. The Egyptians aligned pyramids with Orion's belt, the Mayans built temples to track solstices, and the Mesopotamians studied the stars with precision that still astonishes modern scholars. The builders of Babel lived in the same cultural environment, one where the sky was not merely decoration, but a blueprint for life and architecture. The Tower of Babel may have been constructed not only as a monument of stone, but as a mirror of the heavens above. The phrase, "its top in the heavens," may point to more than ambition. It may indicate that the tower was meant to align with the constellations, serving as a kind of earthly star map. If the ziggurats of Babylon were stairways for gods to descend, then the Tower of Babel may have been envisioned as a ladder of stars, each level reflecting a celestial realm. The builders sought to draw down the heavens to earth, imprinting the cosmic order upon their structure. Astronomy was sacred in Mesopotamia. Priests observed the movements of stars and planets, believing them to be the writing of the gods. These observations were not detached science. They were a form of worship, a means of connecting with divine power. The Tower of Babel, built in that land, was almost certainly designed with such alignments in mind. Every brick may have been placed according to patterns traced in the night sky. This practice of aligning monuments with the stars was not merely symbolic. Ancient peoples believed that such alignment created resonance, a harmony between earth and heaven. By building structures in tune with the cosmos, they sought to open channels of power, to make their cities reflect the eternal order. If Babel followed this principle, then the tower was not just a building, it was a Stargate key, designed to unlock passage into realms mapped by the stars. The biblical narrative supports this possibility by emphasizing the unity of the builders. They did not simply gather to build high, they gathered to build with purpose, guided by a single vision. Their project was not random, it was coordinated. Just as the heavens move in ordered patterns, so they sought to mirror that order on earth, creating a physical structure that harmonized with the celestial blueprint. Yet in doing so, they crossed a boundary. The stars were created by God to declare His glory, not to serve as ladders for men to climb into heaven by their own power. Psalm 19 verse 1 declares, "The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of His hands." The builders of Babel turned that declaration into a tool for their own ambition. They took what was meant to point to the Creator and used it to bypass Him. This misuse of the heavens echoes through history. Astrology replaced astronomy, divination replaced worship, and the stars became idols instead of signs. Babel represents one of the earliest and boldest examples of this distortion. The tower was built on the blueprint of the stars, but its purpose was not to honor God, it was to reach Him without His permission. The stars have always fascinated humanity, calling us to look upward and wonder. At Babel, that wonder turned into presumption. The builders used the heavens as their map, their blueprint, their key, but in doing so, they forgot the one who made the heavens. The result was confusion, scattering, and a reminder that the stars are not ladders for man to climb, but signs pointing to the glory of God. Before the scattering at Babel, humanity shared one language. That language united them in thought, in purpose, and in power. It was more than a convenience. It was a reflection of the original harmony that God intended for His creation. The breaking of that unity marked a turning point in history, but it also raises the question, what was that original language like? Could it have been something more than words, something closer to the very sound of creation itself? The Bible begins with God speaking creation into being. "Let there be light," and light appears. The divine word carries power, a frequency that shapes reality. The Gospel of John affirms this, declaring, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." If the Word itself was the force behind creation, then the original language of humanity may have carried echoes of that creative frequency. It may have been more than speech, it may have been resonance with the divine order, This would explain why humanity, united in one tongue, was able to accomplish so much. Their words were not just sounds, they were aligned with creation itself. Every command, every declaration, every agreement carried creative weight. In that unity, their language functioned as a powerful instrument, capable of building not only towers, but perhaps even of opening gates into the spiritual realm. The scattering of languages shattered this harmony. Suddenly, the creative resonance was divided into fragments. Instead of one pure frequency, there were many broken tones, clashing with one another. Communication became confusion, and the creative force of unity was lost. This was both a loss and a safeguard. The unified tongue had become dangerous in its misuse, and so God divided it to protect humanity from further harm. Yet the longing for a single language has never disappeared. Across cultures and centuries, mankind has sought to recover the language of heaven. Mystical traditions speak of divine names that carry power, of sacred syllables that open doors, of words that heal and transform. These may be distorted memories of the original tongue, fragments of the resonance that once united humanity before Babel. Scripture points forward to a time when that unity will be restored. The prophet Zephaniah declares in chapter 3 verse 9, "That I will purify the lips of the peoples, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder." This promise hints at a return to a single language, not a human invention, but a divine gift, a restoration of the harmony that was lost at Babel. The language of heaven is not simply about words. It is about alignment with the Word, the Logos, the eternal Christ who embodies the creative power of God. To speak the language of heaven is to speak in harmony with Him, to let every word resonate with truth, love, and life. In this sense, the original language was not lost forever. It was preserved in the divine Word who was with God in the beginning. The story of Babel shows us both the power and the danger of language. United in one tongue, humanity reached for heaven in rebellion. Scattered in many tongues, humanity lost its harmony but was preserved. One day, the language of heaven will be restored not as a tool of pride, but as a gift of grace, uniting all nations in worship of the one who spoke the universe into being. When the Tower of Babel came to a halt, the immediate result was the confusion of languages, but the longer effect was the scattering of peoples across the face of the earth. Genesis 11 records that God dispersed humanity, and from this dispersion came the foundations of nations and cultures. What had once been a single people united in tongue and purpose became a world filled with diversity, each group carrying fragments of the old memory and forming new identities as they spread. This scattering did not only reshape language, it reshaped the entire story of human history. Every culture that emerged bore echoes of the original unity. Myths from different lands often contain stories of great towers, of lost languages, and of gods who divided mankind. Ancient legends from Mesopotamia, Africa, and even the Americas preserve fragments of the Babel event, showing that the memory of the scattering was not confined to Israel's scriptures, but spread across humanity. These stories, though told with different details, all point back to the moment when one people became many, when the human story fractured into countless streams. The scattering also explains the diversity of myths and spiritual traditions. As people moved outward, they carried with them partial knowledge of the heavens, of sacred geometry, of sound and word, but without the unity of the original tongue, these truths were distorted and reshaped. What one people remembered as divine wisdom, another preserved as superstition, and another as magic. The fragments of the old knowledge became the seeds of varied religious systems, some closer to truth, some drifting further into darkness. The formation of nations also changed humanity's relationship with power. At Babel, power had been concentrated in one place, one city, one project. After the scattering, power was dispersed, and nations grew apart, each carving its own path. Wars, alliances, kingdoms, and empires arose from this fragmentation, shaping the destiny of the world. What had once been a united humanity became a patchwork of tribes and nations. each carrying the stamp of Babel's judgment and mercy. Yet even in the scattering, God's hand was present. In Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 8, it is written, "When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he set up boundaries for the peoples." The division of humanity was not random, it was under the governance of the Creator, who ordered the spread of peoples according to his design. The scattering was both judgment for rebellion and preparation for the unfolding of God's redemptive plan. The scattering also serves as a reminder of humanity's longing for unity. Across history, nations have sought to overcome their divisions, to create empires, alliances, or even single languages that could restore what was lost. Yet every attempt apart from God repeats the mistake of Babel, seeking unity without him. The scattering teaches that unity cannot be achieved through force or pride, but only through the one true source of harmony. The cultural and linguistic diversity of the world is, in one sense, a reflection of Babel's scattering. Yet it is also a testament to God's creativity, for even in judgment, he allowed beauty and richness to flourish. Languages carry unique rhythms and colors, cultures preserve unique traditions and insights, and the scattering has filled the earth with diversity that reflects the vastness of creation itself. The scattering of nations was not the end of God's story, but the beginning of a new chapter. From the many languages and nations, God would one day call forth a people for himself, through whom he would bring blessing to all the families of the earth. What began as division at Babel would ultimately be healed in the plan of redemption, showing that even in scattering, God was already preparing for gathering. Behind the human ambition at Babel lies the question of influence. Why would mankind suddenly decide to build a tower reaching to heaven, to make a name for themselves, and to force open what had not been given? While human pride and ambition are evident, the scriptures and other ancient texts suggest that unseen forces may also have been at work. Spiritual enemies opposed to God have always sought to corrupt mankind, and Babel may well have been one of their boldest manipulations. The Book of Enoch describes how certain angels, called the Watchers, descended to earth and revealed forbidden knowledge to humanity. They taught secrets of enchantments, astrology, weapons, and hidden arts, knowledge that accelerated human power but also corrupted it. Though not part of the canonical scriptures for most traditions, this text echoes a pattern seen in Genesis 6, where the sons of God take human wives and provoke judgment. The idea is clear. Spiritual beings outside God as will sought to give humanity knowledge it was not ready to bear. Babel may have been the fruit of such influence. If the builders of Babel were guided by whispers of this hidden enemy, then their tower was not just a human invention. It was a project rooted in deception, designed to lure humanity into dependence on powers opposed to God. The ambition to reach heaven was not merely man's pride. It was the enemy's suggestion that mankind could bypass God, that access to the divine could be seized rather than received. This lie echoes the serpent's words in Eden, "You will be like God," a promise of power that leads only to downfall. The false gods of Mesopotamia also play into this story. The region where Babel rose was filled with deities worshipped in temples and ziggurats, each claiming to rule over the heavens and earth. These gods, behind which lay demonic powers, enticed people to build higher and reach farther, promising glory in exchange for allegiance. The tower may have been more than a monument. It may have been an altar, a gateway designed to call upon these false powers, drawing humanity deeper into bondage. Throughout Scripture, the enemy is portrayed as one who seeks to counterfeit the works of God. Just as God has a true gate of heaven, the enemy offers false ones. Just as God offers revelation, the enemy offers imitation through sorcery and divination. Babel fits this pattern perfectly. It was humanity's counterfeit ladder, inspired by the enemy, offering a false ascent that would lead only to destruction. God's intervention at Babel, then, was not only about halting human pride. It was about cutting off the influence of the hidden enemy. By scattering humanity and confusing their tongues, God disrupted the plan of those spiritual forces that sought to unify mankind under their deception. The scattering was a blow not only to human ambition, but to the enemy's scheme to dominate the world through a single false gateway. This perspective casts Babel as a battlefield of spiritual warfare. The enemy tempted humanity with the promise of power, whispering that they could open heaven by their own hands. Humanity followed, but God intervened, protecting them from deeper bondage. The enemy's strategy was delayed, his plans scattered along with the languages of men. The lesson of Babel reminds us that rebellion against God is never purely human. Spiritual forces stand behind it, guiding, deceiving, and luring mankind into traps. The tower was a monument to pride, but also a monument to deception, a testimony to how far humanity can be led astray when it listens to the whispers of the hidden enemy. The story of Babel may seem ancient, but its echoes are found all around us today. Humanity still seeks unity without God, still strives to break boundaries, and still longs to open doors into realms beyond. The same ambition that once built a tower in Shinar now builds machines, networks, and systems designed to transcend the limitations of earth and flesh. Babel was not only a moment in history, it was a pattern that repeats itself whenever mankind seeks to rise without divine guidance. Modern science has achieved wonders that ancient builders could never have imagined. We split atoms, harness the power of stars, explore the vastness of space, and probe the mysteries of matter at its smallest levels. Projects like particle accelerators, designed to unlock the secrets of the universe, carry echoes of the tower. They are not towers of brick, but they are gateways of energy, built with the same desire to reach into places hidden from us. The question remains the same: are these pursuits guided by humility and wisdom, or by pride and ambition? Technology also pushes us toward unity. The internet, global communication, and artificial intelligence have created a new kind of universal language. People scattered by tongue are now drawn back together through machines that translate instantly, connecting billions in one conversation. This pursuit of a single language, whether digital or artificial, resonates with the old dream of Babel, a return to unity without dependence on God. Space exploration carries the same echo. Rockets pierce the skies, astronauts walk among the stars, and mankind dreams of building colonies on distant worlds. Once again, humanity says, "Let us ascend," seeking to climb higher and farther than ever before. While exploration is not evil in itself, the spirit behind it can mirror the same ambition of Babel, the desire to extend beyond limits in search of immortality and divine status. Even the language of science mirrors Babel's ambition. We speak of creating life in laboratories, editing the human genome, merging man and machine to overcome death. These projects are not towers of stone, but they are towers of technology, built to make a name for ourselves, to transcend mortality, to seize what belongs only to God. The warnings of Babel speak loudly in this age. When unity and knowledge are pursued apart from God, they lead to danger. The technologies of today hold great potential for good, but also great peril if driven by pride. Just as God intervened at Babel, He may intervene again to stop mankind from opening doors it cannot close. History repeats itself because the human heart has not changed. The longing for power, unity, and ascent is still with us, and the enemy still whispers the same lies. Babel was an ancient tower, but it is also a mirror of our modern world, reminding us that progress without humility is a pathway to scattering. The echoes of Babel in our time call us to examine the spirit behind our pursuits. Are we building in alignment with God's purposes, or are we building towers that repeat the same mistake, reaching for heaven without Him? The story warns that without God, even our greatest achievements become gateways to confusion. The scattering at Babel divided humanity into many tongues, but Scripture promises that this division will not last forever. The prophets speak of a time when God will restore a pure language, uniting the peoples once more in worship and truth. This restoration is not a return to Babel's counterfeit unity, but a new harmony rooted in God's will. The end of the story of languages is not confusion, but redemption. Zephaniah chapter 3 verse 9 declares, "Then I will purify the lips of the peoples, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder." This promise envisions a future where language is no longer a barrier, but a bridge, where humanity speaks as one not to rebel but to worship. The confusion of Babel will be undone, and the unity once misused will be restored in righteousness. The day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2 offers a glimpse of this future. When the Spirit descended, the apostles began to speak in other tongues, and people from many nations heard them each in their own language. The miracle reversed Babel in miniature, uniting diverse peoples through the Spirit of God. This was a sign that the curse of confusion was being lifted, that a new language of heaven was breaking into the world. Pentecost reveals that the return of one language is not merely about words, but about spirit. The true language of heaven is not limited to grammar or vocabulary. It is the language of the Spirit that transcends divisions. When people are filled with the Spirit, they speak in ways that bridge nations and tongues, uniting them in a shared worship of God. The longing for unity finds its fulfillment not in human engineering, but in divine restoration. Babel sought to create unity through human effort, and it collapsed. God promises to restore unity through His Spirit, and it will endure. The difference lies in the source. One is rebellion, the other is redemption. Prophecy points forward to a day when nations will be gathered, when every tribe and tongue will worship before the throne. Revelation chapter 7 verse 9 describes a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. This vision shows diversity preserved, yet unity restored, as all languages join in one song of praise. The return of one language is not about erasing the beauty of diversity, but about harmonizing it under God. Just as many instruments can play one melody, so the many languages of the world will one day unite in worship, purified and perfected by the Spirit. The scattering of Babel will be reversed, not by human towers, but by divine grace. The promise of a restored language reminds us that God's plan has always been to gather, not to scatter. The scattering was necessary to protect, but the gathering will be the final act of redemption. What began in confusion at Babel will end in clarity as one language returns, the language of heaven, uniting all creation in praise of the Creator. From the beginning of the story, humanity longed for a way to reach heaven. At Babel, people sought to create their own gate, to climb upward by bricks, words, and hidden knowledge. Yet every attempt to ascend apart from God ended in scattering and confusion. The Scriptures reveal that the true gate of heaven was never a tower, never a monument, and never a technology. The true gate was always a person, the one who bridges earth and heaven by his very being. In the Gospel of John chapter 1, verse 51, Jesus declares to Nathanael, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened, and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." These words deliberately echo Jacob's vision of the ladder, showing that the ladder itself was a symbol pointing forward to Christ. He is the true connection between heaven and earth, the living ladder, the Stargate not built with hands but given by God. Where Babel failed, Christ succeeded. The tower was an attempt to seize access. Christ offers access freely. The tower represented human pride. Christ embodies divine humility. The builders of Babel said, "Let us make a name for ourselves." But Christ, though he had the name above all names, made himself nothing, taking on the form of a servant. And through his sacrifice, he opened the way for humanity to enter heaven by grace. Jesus did not only speak of the gate, he identified himself as it. In John chapter 10 verse 9, he says, "I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved." This is the answer to Babel. Humanity's attempt to build its own gate failed, but God himself provided the true gate in his Son. Access to heaven is not earned by construction, knowledge, or ambition, but by faith in the one who is both the Word made flesh and the doorway to eternal life. The crucifixion itself becomes the turning point where heaven's gate is opened. When Jesus died, the curtain of the temple was torn from top to bottom, symbolizing that the barrier between God and man had been removed. What Babel tried to force, Christ accomplished through love. What Babel sought to grasp, Christ gave as a gift. The gate of heaven was opened not by pride, but by the sacrifice of the Son of God. Through him, the scattering of Babel begins to be reversed. At Pentecost, the Spirit came, and people from many nations heard the apostles speaking in their own languages. This was the first fruit of restoration, showing that unity could return, not through towers or human schemes, but through the Spirit poured out by Christ. The language of heaven was beginning to be heard again. The harmony lost at Babel restored in worship of the true King. The longing behind Babel to ascend, to reach heaven, to overcome division, finds its true fulfillment in Christ. He is the ladder Jacob saw, the gate Ezekiel glimpsed, the chariot that carried Elijah, the word that created the world. Every image of ascent in Scripture points to him, the one who brings heaven down to earth and raises earth up to heaven. In him, the dream of Babel is fulfilled, not as rebellion, but as redemption. The story of Babel teaches that humanity cannot reach heaven by its own strength. But the story of Christ shows that heaven has come down to reach us. The true Stargate is not a tower of bricks, but the Son of Man lifted on the cross and raised to glory. Whoever enters by him finds life, access, and the fulfillment of the deepest human longing. He is the true gate of heaven, the answer to Babel, and the bridge that unites God and man forever. The Tower of Babel was more than a story of bricks and mortar. It was humanity's attempt to reach heaven through pride, technology, and ambition. But it also revealed the danger of seeking access apart from God, the scattering that follows rebellion, and the mercy of divine intervention. Throughout history, echoes of Babel have appeared in empires, in technologies, and even in our modern world. Yet the Scriptures remind us that the true gate of heaven was never built by human hands. It was revealed in Jesus Christ, the one who opens the way and unites what was scattered. If this message has touched your heart and given you new insight into the mystery of Babel and the true gate of heaven, I invite you to stay connected with us. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the next message. Like this video to help it reach more people. Leave a comment below to share your thoughts or reflections, and let us know what part of this message spoke to you most. And finally, share this video with your family and friends, so that together we can spread the truth, the hope, and the light that only God can give.